I still remember the exact moment it happened, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because of how casually it slipped out of his mouth, like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. We were sitting at the dinner table, just the two of us, like we had done thousands of times before, except everything felt different that night. The air felt heavier, the silence longer. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't to ask how my day had been or if I needed anything. It was to say, with a shrug and a tone so detached it chilled me to bone, "You know, sometimes it feels like you're just a burden." He didn't even look at me when he said it. He just kept scrolling on his phone, as if he had commented on the weather or mentioned that the food needed salt. And for a second, I didn't even understand what I had heard. I thought maybe I misheard him. Maybe my mind twisted his words into something cruel, because I was already feeling tired and unwell. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw no regret, no hesitation, no awareness that he had just shattered something inside me that might never fully heal. I stayed quiet, but I was watching everything. It's strange how a single sentence can rewind your entire life. As I sat there, staring at my own son, the boy I had carried, raised, protected, sacrificed everything for, I felt years folding in on themselves. I saw him as a baby, gripping my finger with that tiny hand, refusing to let go. I saw myself working double shifts, coming home exhausted, but still finding the energy to cook his favorite meals, help with homework, sit through school plays where he barely noticed I was in the audience. I remembered the nights I went to bed hungry so he could have more, the opportunities one turned down, so he wouldn't feel alone, the life I slowly gave up piece by piece, so he could build his own. And now, sitting across from me, he reduced all of that to one word: burden. I wanted to respond. I wanted to ask him how he could say something like that, what had changed, where I had gone wrong. But the words didn't come out. Instead, I just nodded slightly, as if he had said something ordinary, and continued eating. He didn't notice. That was the part that hurt the most. He didn't notice. Not the silence. Not the shift in my expression. Not the way my hands trembled slightly as I picked up my fork. It was like I had already become invisible in my own home. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replay his words over and over again, trying to understand how we got here. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when he called me every day just to check in, when he valued my opinion, when he treated me with a kind of warmth that made all the sacrifices worth it. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At first, it was small things, shorter conversations, delayed replies, a slight impatience in his tone. Then it grew into something harder to ignore, dismissive comments, subtle irritations, the way he started making decisions without even informing me. And I told myself it was normal. He was growing up, becoming independent, building his own life. That's what parents are supposed to want, right? But this wasn't independence. This was distance. This was disregard. This was something colder, something calculated, even if he didn't realize it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp in a way it hadn't been in a long time. There's a certain clarity that comes after heartbreak, a kind of quiet determination that replaces confusion. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world wake up, and for the first time in years, I started thinking not about what my son needed, but about what I had ignored. Small details, patterns, things that didn't quite add up, like how he had suddenly taken an interest in my finances. It had started innocently enough. He offered to help me organize my accounts, said it would make things easier for both of us. I trusted him. Of course I did. He was my son. I gave him access, shared information I probably shouldn't have, signed documents without reading every line, because he assured me it was just routine paperwork. At the time, it felt like he was taking care of me. Now, sitting there with his words echoing in my head, it felt different. It felt like I had been slowly handing over pieces of control without even realizing it. That was their biggest mistake. Because while I may have stayed quiet, I wasn't blind. And once I started looking back, really looking, the pieces began to fall into place in a way that made my stomach turn. The changes in his behavior didn't happen randomly. They followed a pattern, one that seemed to align perfectly with every time I gave him more access, more responsibility, more trust. The more control he had, the less respect he showed. It was as if, in his mind, I had already become something else. Not a parent, not a person, just an obligation, a weight. I finished my coffee and stood up slowly, feeling a strange mix of sadness and something else I couldn't quite name yet. It wasn't anger, not fully. It was sharper than that, clearer, like a quiet realization that something needed to be done, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone, especially not after the night I had. But something made me pick it up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was timing. "Hello," I said, my voice still carrying the weight of everything I hadn't processed yet. "Good morning." The voice on the other end said professional, polite, but with an edge of urgency. Am I speaking with... They said my name, full and formal, the way institutions always do. "Yes, this is me." "Hi, I'm calling from the bank regarding your account. There's been some unusual activity, and we need to confirm a few things with you directly." I frowned, immediately confused. "Unusual activity? What do you mean?" There was a brief pause, the kind that makes your heart start beating a little faster. "There have been several transactions and authorization changes that require your verification. Normally, we would go for the listed secondary contact, but given the nature of these changes, we felt it was necessary to speak with you personally." My grip on the phone tightened. "Secondary contact. Him. I see," I said slowly, my mind racing ahead of the conversation. "Can you tell me what kind of changes?" "Of course," they replied. "But first, for security purposes, I'll need to confirm a few details." As they spoke, asking routine verification questions, I answered automatically, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Pieces were connecting now, faster than I could process them. The documents I signed, the access I gave, the way he insisted on handling things to make it easier, and then his words from the night before, echoing louder than ever. "You're just a burden." They had no idea what I had already done, because even before that call ended, even before I fully understood the extent of what was happening, something inside me shifted completely. The confusion was gone. The doubt was gone. What replaced it was something steady, something deliberate. I listened carefully as the bank representative explained the situation in more detail, each word adding another layer to the truth I had been avoiding. Transactions I didn't authorize, changes I didn't approve, decisions made in my name without my full understanding. And as shocking as it was, there was also a strange sense of clarity in it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a phase. This was betrayal. And for the first time since he spoke those words at the dinner table, I didn't feel just hurt. I felt awake. The voice on the phone kept talking, but everything slowed down in my mind, like time itself was stretching just enough for me to absorb the weight of what I was hearing. The bank representative listed dates, amounts, changes to permissions, and every single detail felt like another quiet confirmation of something I had refused to believe about my own son. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I just listened, letting it all settle in, piece by piece, because reacting too quickly would have been a mistake. And I wasn't going to make any more mistakes. "I'd like to request a temporary freeze on all outgoing transactions," I said calmly once they finished explaining. My voice surprised even me. It didn't shake, didn't crack, didn't betray the storm inside my chest. "Of course," the representative replied immediately. "We can do that right away. Would you also like to revoke secondary access until we complete the review?" There was again secondary access, the polite, professional term for what now felt like a knife slowly twisting in my back. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Revoke everything." There was a brief pause as they processed the request, and in that silence, I realized something important, something I should have realized a long time ago. Trust, once misplaced, doesn't just disappear. It gets used. It gets reshaped into something else, something dangerous if left unchecked. And I had left it unchecked for far too long. "I've completed the changes," the voice returned. "Your accounts are now secured, and all previous authorizations have been removed. We will also open a formal review. If anything further arises, we will contact you directly." "Thank you," I said quietly, and I meant it. not just for security, but for the wake-up call I didn't know I needed. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I looked older than I remembered, not just physically, but emotionally, like something inside me had aged overnight. But beneath that, there was something else too, something steadier, sharper. I made one call, and everything changed, but that call wasn't the bank. Not yet, because before I did anything else, I needed to understand just how far this had gone. I stood up slowly and walked toward the small cabinet in the corner of the living room where I kept old documents. It wasn't something I access often, just a place for records, statements, papers I told myself I'd organize one day. That day had clearly arrived. I opened it and started pulling things out, stacking them on the table one by one. Old bank statements, signed forms, letters I barely remembered reading. And as I went through them, something became painfully clear. This hadn't happened overnight. It had been building for months. Subtle changes at first, additional permissions, joint access adjustments, small transactions that didn't raise immediate concern. Then gradually, more significant shifts, larger transfers, changes in account structure, decisions that should have required my direct approval but somehow didn't. And every time, there was a signature. My signature, given freely without suspicion, because I trusted the person who placed those papers in front of me. My son. I paused, holding one document in my hand longer than the others. It was one I vaguely remembered signing late at night, after a long day, when he told me it was just a formality. I hadn't even read it properly. I just signed where he pointed, trusting him the way a parent trusts a child who once needed help tying his shoes. That was their biggest mistake. Because they thought I would never look back. They thought I would stay exactly where they placed me, confused, dependent, unaware. But something had changed now, not just because of the bank call, not just because of the documents, but because of what he said at that table. That one sentence stripped away every illusion I had been holding on to. You're just a burden. No, not anymore. By the time the front door opened that afternoon, I had already put everything back in place. Not physically, but strategically. The documents were stacked neatly again, but now I knew exactly what each one meant. The accounts were secured. The access was revoked. And most importantly, I had clarity. He walked in like nothing had happened. "Hey," he said casually, dropping his keys on the table. "You're up early." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the child I raised. I saw someone else. Someone who had made decisions behind my back. Someone who sat across from me the night before and reduced my entire existence to a burden without a second thought. "Yeah," I replied evenly. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded, barely paying attention, already halfway into the kitchen. "You should rest more. Stress isn't good for you." The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. I stayed quiet, but I was watching everything, every movement, every word, every tiny inconsistency in his behavior that I had ignored before now stood out with sharp clarity. The way he avoided eye contact for just a second too long. The way his tone carried a subtle edge of control when he spoke about anything related to finances or decisions. The way he moved through the house like it was already his, like I was just occupying space. "Did anyone call today?" he asked suddenly, his voice too casual. There it was. A small question, but not meaningless. I shook my head slightly. "No." "Why?" He shrugged, opening the fridge. "Just asking. Sometimes they call about random stuff." "Random stuff?" I nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, even though my mind was already connecting the dots. He knew, or at least, he suspected something might happen. Maybe the bank had tried to contact him first. Maybe he was expecting a call. Either way, his reaction told me more than any document could. They had no idea what I'd already done. Because while he stood there, thinking everything was still under his control, he didn't know that the access was gone. He didn't know the accounts were locked down. He didn't know the next steps I was about to take. And I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind filled with unspoken tension. like two people standing on opposite sides of something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. He went about his routine, checking his phone more often than usual, stepping outside once or twice to take calls he didn't want to hear. I noticed everything, every glance, every pause, every shift in his behavior. And with each passing hour, my resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect. This was about boundaries. This was about understanding exactly when and how things went wrong, and making sure they were set right, no matter how uncomfortable that process would be. That evening, as we sat down for dinner again, the same table, the same chairs, the same quiet atmosphere, I felt something different inside me. Not the fragile sadness from the night before, but something steadier, something grounded. He started talking about something trivial, work, plans, things that no longer held any real weight in the context of everything else. I listened, nodding occasionally, letting him speak, letting him believe that everything was still the same. But it wasn't, because this time I wasn't just listening. I was preparing, and he had no idea what was coming next. Something shifted in me as I sat across from him that night, listening to him talk about things that suddenly felt so small compared to what was unfolding beneath the surface. He was explaining something about work, about a colleague who annoyed him, about how stressful things have been lately. And for a brief second, I almost saw him the way I used to. The boy who came home from school complaining about unfair teachers. The teenager who needed reassurance more than advice. But that image didn't hold. It couldn't. Not after everything I now knew. Not after what he had already done. I let him finish, nodding slightly, then placed my fork down gently. The sound was soft, but it was enough to make him look up, and when he did, I held his gaze, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something much heavier. Awareness. Did the bank call you today? I asked quietly. It was a simple question, but it landed like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the ripple move across his face, the brief tightening of his jaw, the flicker in his eyes, the way his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. No, he said too quickly. Why would they? I nodded slowly, as if I believed him, even though we both knew the truth had already entered the room. Interesting, I replied, because they called me. That was a moment everything cracked. He froze. Completely. The confidence he carried so casually just minutes ago vanished, replaced by something raw, something unprepared. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have an immediate response. He just stared at me, searching my face, trying to understand how much I knew, how far things had gone. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply continued, calmly, deliberately. They mentioned unusual activity, changes I didn't approve, transactions I didn't authorize. I paused just long enough for the weight of those words to settle. Do you know anything about that? His reaction wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. He looked down for a moment, then back up, trying to piece together an explanation, something that would soften what had already been exposed. I was just helping, he said finally. You know that. You asked me to manage things. I asked for help, I interrupted gently. Not control. Silence filled the space between us, thick and undeniable. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out this time, because there weren't any left that could fix what had already been done. I leaned back slightly, still watching him, still steady. I trusted you. I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Completely. And you used that. It's not like that, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. I was just trying to make things easier. You don't understand how complicated all of it is. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. You're right. I didn't understand. That was the problem. And there it was. The truth, laid bare in the simplest possible way. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping in now, not because he felt guilty, but because he was losing control of the situation. So what? You think I was stealing from you? He snapped, the defensive edge returning. I don't think, I replied calmly. I know it was done. I saw the documents. I heard it from the bank. And more importantly, I paused, letting my next words land with precision. I saw how you see me. That stopped him again. You said I was a burden, I continued, my voice still steady, but carrying a depth he couldn't ignore. Do you know what that means? It means somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your parent and started seeing me as a problem to manage. His expression shifted, something like regret flickering for a moment, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I didn't mean it like that, he said, quieter now. But you did, I replied, maybe not intentionally, maybe not consciously, but you did. The room fell silent again, and this time it stayed that way for longer. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to hide behind. Then I took a slow breath and said the words that would change everything. I made one call and everything changed. He looked up sharply, confusion and concern mixing in his expression. What do you mean? I said, meet his eyes directly. Your access is gone. Every account, every authorization. The bank is reviewing everything. And if there's anything that crosses a line legally, I let the sentence trail off, not as a threat, but as a possibility. His face drained of color. You wouldn't, he said, almost in disbelief. I already did, I answered. That was the moment he truly understood. Not just that he had been caught, but that the dynamic had shifted completely. The control he thought he had was gone. The quiet compliance he relied on was gone. And the person he had dismissed as a burden wasn't that person anymore. They had no idea what I had already done. He pushed his chair back slightly, running both hands over his face now, the weight of the situation finally settling in. I didn't think it would go this far, he muttered. That's the problem, I said softly. You didn't think. For a long moment, he didn't respond, and when he finally looked up again, there was something different in his eyes. Not arrogance, not control, but something closer to realization, maybe even regret. But by then, it felt too late for that to matter the way it once would have. I was trying to build something, he said quietly, for both of us. I held his gaze, unflinching. Then you should have built it with me, not around me. The words settled heavily between us. Neither of us spoke after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said. The truth had surfaced. The illusion had broken. And what remained was something far more real, even if it was uncomfortable. The next morning, the house felt different. Not tense, not hostile, just honest. He moved quieter, more aware, like someone who had finally seen the consequences of his actions in full clarity. And I moved differently too, not as someone hurt or lost, but as someone who had reclaimed something important, myself, because in the end, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the betrayal in the way I first felt it. It was about something deeper. The moment I realized that silence, when used properly, isn't weakness. It's observation. It's patience. It's power. I stayed quiet, but I was watching everything. And when the time came, I didn't explode. I didn't seek revenge in the way people expect. I simply took back what was mine, my control, my voice, my place in my own life. That was their biggest mistake. Thinking I wouldn't. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people you trust the most. And when it does, the hardest part isn't losing them. It's finding yourself again after you've been quietly pushed aside. But once you do, everything changes. And this time, I won't forget that.